it going? Thad Brown here with you on the Endgame. It is Thursday, April the 9th. The Masters from Augusta is underway, a tradition unlike any other. That right now, Sam Burns and Rory McIlroy leading both at 500 par. Rory's got a few more holes to play. I'm trying to get the leaderboard fired up on my computer here, so I kind of keep an eye on things as we go. The computer's not super fast today, but that is my problem, not yours. We will also get into the Bills draft strategy. I think round one has a couple of very interesting options that people are not talking about a lot. And with the Sabres, how much credit does Kevin Adams get for this turnaround, this team that is now competing and very close to finishing not only in the playoffs, but in first place in their division? So we'll talk about hockey as well today on the show, as we often do. Let's begin with the Bills. And I've talked a little bit on this program about where I stand with the Bills first round draft. Wow, the computer is just not wanting to throw the Masters leaderboard up. I guess like many people in the world who are supposed to be being productive and working today, I'm not going to be allowed to check in on the Masters occasionally. I don't even want to put the video feed on. Just give me the leaderboard, for gosh sakes. Man. All right, I'm going to have to send a nasty note to my engineer. Anyway, back to the Bills draft. So I've said a few times on this show that in my ideal world, the Bills would go edge in round one and then receiver in round three. Because I think receiver is a little deeper than edge to where you can find somebody good in the at pick 91, or if the Bills want to trade up a little bit into the 80s or so, maybe low high 70s to grab somebody better. I think that's the better play than trying to find a really impactful edge down there in round three. But also because when you're talking about what the Bills need and what they've lacked the last few years, it has been the elite level players. The Bills have Josh Allen, but they never really had anybody else. Stephon Diggs was close for a while. The Hyde-Pollard tandem at safety, certainly both guys were individually really, really good. But as a combo, I think you can make the argument that that was close to an, quote, elite player. But when you think about the teams the Bills have lost to in the playoffs, maybe not so much Denver, but the Chiefs teams, it wasn't just Patrick Mahomes. It was Travis Kelce. It was Tyreek Hill. It was Chris Jones. There were other players on the roster, on the field, that could have that outsized impact in a game and change things. And the Bills have not had those players. And you don't find those players in free agency anymore. The salary cap has gotten too big. Teams are doing a better job figuring out how to use it, how to operate around it. So the really good players, the players who can be impactful, they don't ever make it to free agency. So you can't find that guy in March. Now, you can occasionally trade for them, as the Bills did with Stephon Diggs. But even then, who was the impactful player that was traded to anybody this year? It was Max Crosby for a hot second, but he failed the physical, so he didn't get to stay in Baltimore, ended up going back to the Raiders. And yet Trey Hendrickson in free agency has a chance to be that guy, but he's 31. He's got his own, stability and dependability issues at that age. It's just very, very rare to be able to find that player, that guy that the Bills have been missing for so many years, outside of the draft. So, all right, fine. If they can't find a player like that outside the draft, then go get that guy in the draft. Well, if you're going to do that in the draft, you obviously have to pick a player that's going to be at an impactful position, and that's where we land on receiver and edge. Obviously, you go through the different positions in the NFL. Some are more game-changing than others. Edge rusher, offensive tackle, receiver. Offensive line maybe in general, defensive line maybe in general. You don't find those guys too often as corners, and certainly not as safeties or as linebackers, or most of the time as at running backs. So you take all that general logic, all that general knowledge of how to put together or how to locate the elite players that can win you playoff games without having to rely on Josh Allen, and you quickly land on, well, then what the Bills should be doing in the draft is going after an edge rusher or a receiver, because they're good at tackle and they're not good at receiver and edge. But maybe there is another option. And I think I'm starting, as we get closer to the draft, to lean a little more towards maybe defensive tackle is the play for Buffalo in round one. And let me kind of lay out the scenario why. First of all, the thought here was kind of sparked by the Peter Schrager mock draft. And what Peter Schrager does, for people who don't know, he works at ESPN now, was recently at NFL Network for a long time. His mock draft is always based on things he's hearing. Peter Schrager is not a guy that's diving into the all 22, breaking down tape, thinking about tendencies, looking at hand placement, stuff like that. He's just talking about, he talks to people in the league, and based on what they're saying, this is who he thinks people are going to pick. And the pick he had for the Bills at number 26 was a defensive tackle named Caden McDonald from Ohio State. And I don't think Bills fans necessarily reacted largely negatively to that, but I think the general assumption has been receiver or edge with that first pick. So why does defensive tackle make sense? Because the more I've thought about this Schrager idea, the more I've kind of thought that this might make some sense for the Bills. Number one, you look at the edges that might be available to the Bills. First of all, as we've said on this show, this draft is not very good in general, and certainly not good at the top of round one. There are very few elite level players. I think for the most part, the thought is there are about 12 first round graded players. Most drafts have on average 15, 23 and 24 had close to 20. This draft has 12. There are just not a lot of elite talents, and that includes the edge group. When you think about this edge group, in terms of, who the guys are at the top, the number one player most people think who will be drafted as an edge is Arvell Reese, who I don't think anyone is even sure he can play edge. He was more an off-ball linebacker, or at least 50-50 as an off-ball linebacker in college. He's the best guy in the draft, and people aren't sure he can play the position that he would likely be playing as the number 2 overall pick. After that, it's Ruben Bain, who I'm sure you've heard at this point, has little stubby arms that might cause him a problem. And I don't want to knock the idea that short arms could be an issue, because historically, very few productive quarterback or pass rushers have arms below 32 inches, and Bain's are around 31. So while he might be the exception, and there are a few of those, you are betting on an exception with the guy who might be the second best pass rusher in this draft. And then the other guy who could be number 2 or maybe number 1 is David Bailey, who's ridiculously quick. I mean, he has got explosion and bend out of his ears, but he's really bad against the run. So yeah, he might be a really good pass rusher, but for a team taking him in the top 10, you can't use him on first and second down. And these are the best guys in this draft. So you think about what the Bills are going to be looking at pick 26, it's some combination of Cassius Howell, who, if you think Ruben Bain's arms are short, let me tell you what Cassius Howell, his arms measured even an inch shorter than Bain, for the close to that. Keldrick Falk down there, really good against the run, giant human, needs a lot of work with his pass rush. Akeem Mesidor from Miami. A lot of experts like him. I really don't. He's a 25-year-old who very easily could have made his success in college because he's experienced and the guys he's going against are not. When you're 24 and you're facing an 18-year-old, that's a ridiculous advantage at the NCAA level, even for Division I. TJ Parker, not a ton of burst, a little on the slower side, big and strong. There are no clean prospects, not anywhere in this draft, let alone where the Bills are going to pick down at number 26. So if you're thinking about spending that first round pick, and yeah, you do want to have the upside of potentially finding that playoff game altering player, that franchise altering elite player. But with this group of edges, and you're taking the 5th or 6th best version of them, you might get a guy that just can't play in the league. Or it might be, Greg Rousseau is a guy who was picked in this range. And he's been an above average at minimum, solid edge rusher. But he's not great. He's not changing anything. There's a reason why the Bills signed Joey Bosa last year and signed Bradley Chubb this year and signed Von Miller a few years ago, because Greg Rousseau has never been that guy. He's good. He's solid. He's someone you like having on your team, but he's not that elite game changer. And if you want to find one of those guys, you probably got to draft them at round 1. But if you take a shot with this group, the floor for all of these guys is pretty low. And that's why I go back to Caden McDonald. throw his video back up there now that we're going to talk about him a little more. So the thing with McDonald, I don't know if he's the best defensive tackle in the draft. I think most people would say yes to that, but Peter Woods from Clemson and Caleb Banks from Florida, I believe, are also in that discussion. I think McDonald I think he's the best defensive tackle in the draft. Here's the thing with Caden McDonald. He pretty much has one move. He's big and he's going to go straight forward. And you can't move him. This is not a guy that you are going to be able to push 5 yards downfield. This is not a guy that you're going to be able to shove sideways away from a gap. He's got a really strong bull rush. He's the kind of, when you watch Caden McDonald play, most of his plays are the ball is snapped and whoever's across the line of scrimmage from him goes 1 yard backward immediately. And he's really, really effective against the run. This guy is going to walk into the NFL next year, and I don't care what team he plays for, right off the bat, the moment he walks into the locker room, that team's run defense is going to get better. There are some questions there, and there's a reason why he's going to pick 26 or maybe in round 2, whatever. It's not a guarantee that he's going to be impactful against the run, but it's a pretty damn good bet. The problem is that there's not a whole lot of wiggle. He's not a guy that has any sort of bag when it comes to rushing the passer. He doesn't have a ton of moves. And there's a question whether he might not ever play on third down in the NFL, point blank. He might not ever be that guy. And from the Bills' point of view, he played a whole lot of straight up nose at Ohio State. So you think about a fit into a defense, you can 1,000% take Caden McDonald, drop him in at nose tackle on first and second down, and he will not only be reasonable, he will probably thrive in Buffalo. So now, if you're the Bills and you think about how you want to spend your first round pick, do you want to take Caden McDonald? A guy that, again, will walk in day one and take what's been a giant weakness on your team for years and make it a whole lot better? A guy who will take Deion Walker out of a spot where Deion Walker's got to be that guy. Now you can use Walker on third down from that head up position, that nose tackle type position. You can move Deion Walker around. Deion Walker has shown that even for a guy who's gigundous at 6'6", that he's got some moves to him. He's got some wiggle. He can be a threat against the quarterback. You don't want to pigeonhole him into being your first and second down run guy, which right this second is probably the thing the Bills need him for the most. So you draft Caden McDonald, you probably not only allow Caden McDonald to improve your run defense, but Deion Walker now becomes a more effective player because you can move him around. You can lean him into pass rushing downs. You can move him outside a little more if you want. You make him more versatile, and now you've taken a couple different spots in your defensive line and improved them. So the question becomes, do you want to do that, but understand that McDonald is probably never making your pass rush better? Certainly not in year one, and maybe not ever. And you will miss out on the chance that maybe the lottery ticket that is Cassius Howell hits, or miss out on the chance that Keldrick Falk, as one of the bigger, more rock-solid human beings in this draft, figures it out as a pass rusher and becomes a weekly threat that nobody can block? Do you miss out on the chance that Akeem Mesidor, even though he's 25 years old, comes into the NFL so polished that draft pick becomes 3 or 4 years of instant pass rush juice? That's the question for the Bills. And as little elite talent as there is in this draft, and as much question marks as there is around this edge group, I do lean more and more into the defensive tackle idea that I feel is more likely to solve a problem. Now, the Bills might be just better off to say, look, this offseason, there was never really a window for us to land that elite player. That guy was just not available to us this year. We weren't going to pay gazillions of dollars for a Trey Hendrickson, which, yeah, he might have been an impact player, but I think from a roster building point of view, especially the situation the Bills are in, I can certainly understand the move. The draft was never good, even if you had picked 16, let alone pick 26. So where the Bills are picking, they're just not finding that elite guy. And If you are good with that, you take Caden McDonald, you solve a problem, and you move forward. And you can't really look at the draft as a one-year game anyway. This is not just about making this team, especially that first-round pick, about how good this team is or what this team needs in 2026. You draft Caden McDonald now, and you fix that defensive line, that run defense problem, and then next year, when the draft is ridiculous, maybe that's when you go out and find your elite edge rusher. And maybe, look, like I've said a few times, I don't think this is a high probability year for the Bills going to the Super Bowl. And if that's the case, take your defensive tackle, solve your problem, and then go find the elite guy next year when he's more likely to be available, and then next year's your year. And maybe the year after that and the year after that. And you can't get to that point if you try and lock into Cassius Howell this year, make him your guy. He doesn't work, so you don't get anything out of him any of these years. And then next year when the draft is great, maybe you don't spend on an edge because you feel like you just spent a first rounder on an edge this year. So there's a lot of logic to grabbing a defensive tackle in round one. Now, like Caden McDonald might not even be available. And this is the problem with sitting here and projecting a draft 26 picks in. You don't know where anyone's going to be. But big picture, what's available to the Bills and where this team might go, not for just this fall, but multiple years, I'm really leaning towards defensive tackle being the answer. Now, that's not the only draft thought that I want to kind of bring to you here today, because I want to talk about the Bills' offensive line just for a second, right? So right now, the Bills have under contract Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, and Connor McGovern, all making top 13 money. Deion is 13th in the NFL at left tackle. Spencer Brown is top 10, but not top 5. Connor McGovern is top 5 at center. And when I mean Spencer Brown, at just right tackle, not tackle overall. So that's 3 pretty fat contracts that are already on your offensive line. Well, then you got Osiris Torrance, who's in the last year now of his rookie contract, going into it this year. He's certainly somebody that deserves an extension. This is a guy that's going to start in the NFL for probably close to another decade. And whether he gets that money with the Bills or somewhere else or some other team, somebody is going to pay him. And I think the Bills would prefer it to be them. Brandon Beane has always said, we draft and develop. We draft and develop. And they've been very good at making good on that. They find a player that works for them, even at a level where like you might want to squint a little and think, is that really somebody you want to pay? Dawson Knox, for example. The Bills still, almost without exception, will go and pay that player. Tremaine Edmonds might be the only one. So I'm sure Osiris Torrance getting a big contract from the Bills is something Brandon Beane wants to do. But does that make sense? And I want to give Carl Jones a little credit here, my buddy from Bills Kickoff Live over at WIVB in Buffalo, for kind of getting the ball rolling with this. And let me tell also little promo for you here. Coming up tonight at 8:30 on Rochester First right here, another edition of BKL Nightly. Carl Jones joins me. We're going to dive into our draft hot takes, things that we think are absolutely almost ludicrous for us to believe, but takes we have. We'll go through them all. And one of the things that Carl brought up on that show was the situation with the Bills on offensive line. Because if you give Osiris Torrance that big contract he deserves, now you got 4 guys on the offensive line you're paying. And Carl's take was, I don't think that's smart roster building. So I went back and checked it out. And over the last 10 years, so last 20 Super Bowl teams were the teams I looked at. And I don't think you want to go much further back than 10 years because the finances of the NFL change so fast. The salary cap gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. If you look at what a team did in terms of their financial breakdown in 2015, it might not even be the same sport to what it is right now. So even 10 years, I kind of felt like was going too far back. But going to the last 20 Super Bowl teams, okay, only 5 had even 3 offensive linemen that were on big contracts. So you think about your starting 5 offensive linemen. 15 of the last 20 Super Bowl champions had more guys they were paying either as on a rookie contract or on a contract that was rookie equivalent, like just a really, really low veteran deal. 15 of the last 20 teams had more offensive linemen who were on that contract than weren't. At least 3. And then only 2 teams of the last 20 who went to the Super Bowl had 4 offensive linemen who were making what we'll call generically big money. And of those 4, it was 3 guys who were making big money and a 4th guy who was kind of making mid money. Not a elite contract, but certainly a you're going to start for us kind of deal, but it's not the ridiculous top of the market kind of thing, and you're making way more than a rookie. Only 2, and they were both named the Philadelphia Eagles, unsurprisingly. What that tells you is, almost exclusively, you cannot have an offensive line with 4 big contracts on it and expect to go to the Super Bowl. Or at least it has not happened over the last decade. Now, again, the Eagles made it work with 3 big contracts and a mid and a rookie. And in part because those Eagles championship teams, one of the ridiculous strengths, when you think about why the Eagles went to the Super Bowl, line 1 was the offensive line. I think in both cases. There are arguments for sure. So they may have paid the offensive line more than everybody else who went to the Super Bowl, but they made it one of their strengths. And I will say that in the world where the Bills keep O'Cyrus Torrence, it could absolutely be that this offensive line is maybe not quite that Philly Eagles good, especially with a brand new O-line coach coming in this year, but it can be close. You can make it reasonably strong, or a reasonable argument that next to Josh Allen, the Bills' best strength going forward, even with Alec Anderson, as we expect, the starter at left guard, that the offensive line is the strength of this team. So it's not out of the realm for the Bills to end up with an Eagles-esque quality of offensive line if you're paying 4 guys to do that job. But even then, that is not the ideal situation. Because, as I just said, 15 of 20 Super Bowl teams didn't even pay 3 guys. And we're talking about the Bills paying 4. So what do you do if you're Buffalo? Well, you could go out and find a replacement in the draft. Now, one idea is not even about O'Cyrus Torrence. But let's start with the O'Cyrus Torrence idea, okay? So Torrence, obviously, going into the last year of his rookie deal, been an excellent player for the Bills. Maybe not excellent, but certainly Buffalo is happy with the spend on the second round pick. He's been really good. But what you could do if you're Buffalo is you take a guard in round 3, not in round 1. I mean, there are interior offensive linemen who are available in round 1, but I think in terms of, like we just talked about before, what's a more better use of your assets in terms of going after impactful positions. Guard is not a high on the list of your game-changing positions. So it's not something you want to use a first-round pick on. So you go get a guard in round 3. You draft a guard in round 3. You let that guy be one of the backups this year. I know you've got Lloyd Cushenberry, and you signed Austin Corbett, and that looks like your interior depth. Cedric Van Pran Granger still on this team. You can still draft a guy in round 3, and then maybe you just move on from Corbett or Cushenberry. You could potentially find a trade partner for one of those guys at the end of camp. There are all kinds of options that you can have when you have extra linemen lying around. Either way, it wouldn't hurt anything for the Bills to bring in a 3rd-round guard for this year and to make that guy the backup. And even worst case, if Alec Anderson doesn't work out, now you've got another young ascending option that maybe you plug into another guard spot for this year and going forward. So there's lots of good reasons why the Bills could draft a guard, but then what you do, you let O'Cyrus Torrence play out his contract, and then you just let him go in free agency. And you take the potential comp pick you might get out of that. And the guy you drafted this year becomes your replacement at guard. It's it's not an illogical solution, for the spot that the Bills are in. But it would require you to look at a player that you drafted in round 2 who is 1,000% hit and just let him go and not pay him and hope that the guy you picked up, and when you make this decision next year, you would have a full year of having this guy in-house, watching him in practice, likely getting some game action somewhere, and you'd have a better take on how good they are in the NFL than just trying to scout him as a college player. But you still would be having to bet on that projection and moving on from O'Cyrus Torrence, who is going into his prime after you spent 4 years developing him into a really good offensive guard. Not a fun solution, but this is how it goes in the NFL. If you're going to be able to keep up and not overpay your offensive line, then you might have to go with Alec Anderson and rookie or second-year player X for 2027. And again, this whole problem about paying 4 offensive linemen, even if the Bills wanted to give O'Cyrus Torrence an extension this year, the cap hit this year would be so small that essentially it would still be 3 big money offensive linemen and 2 guys that are on young/rookie contracts. So this is not really a 2026 problem. It's a 2027 problem. But it's these kind of problems you don't want to leave for 2027. The Bills don't want to have to walk into next year. I think that the worst case scenario is that the Bills go into March next year with choice A being we have to pay O'Cyrus Torrence a big contract that maybe we don't have much leverage for because free agency is hours or days away or it's already begun. And even if we do keep him, we end up with 4 big money offensive linemen, a roster build that has never worked for a team that made the Super Bowl. Or you let him walk next year and you have to find somebody, whether it be in free agency or the draft. That is not where the Bills want to end up. So to avoid that, you got to draft the guy right now. So that to me is the maybe not most likely or most logical, but certainly one of the solutions available to the Bills is drafting a guard round 3, maybe round 4 this year. The other possibility, a little more out of the box, but when you really roll it around, it might actually be the better play, is you draft a tackle this year. Now, we'll skip how he fits into the team this year for a moment. But going into 2027, that becomes the heir apparent to Deion Dawkins. And you could trade Deion Dawkins maybe for the same 3rd-round pick you would have gotten in a compensation if you let O'Cyrus Torrence walk, maybe even for something better. And you sign O'Cyrus Torrence, so now your big money offensive linemen become McGovern, Torrence, and Brown. And you have Alec Anderson and second-year player X on the other side of the line at right guard, or left guard and left tackle. Now, that does make sense in a vacuum, okay, in terms of building it that way, especially from the point of view that if you're going to go with 3 offensive linemen that you want to pay, it's probably a better idea to pay O'Cyrus Torrence, who as a guard might cost you a little less to begin with, but also is going into the prime of his career, is about to have arguably the best 3 or 4 years of his career as an offensive lineman, as opposed to Deion Dawkins, who's well past 30. He'd be 33 next year, or 32, and paying him for 3 years when he's probably going down the backside of his career. Now, obviously, Deion Dawkins and his connection to the community and the team in general muddy this discussion a little bit. From a purely football point of view, though, it makes more sense to pay the younger guy than the older player, just in general. The problem with that, though, is finding the tackle to replace Deion. Because you can go get a starting guard in round 3 or round 4. It happens all the time. Left tackles almost always are first-round picks. I don't remember the exact number, but I did go through the whole league in terms of who the starters were at left tackle. It's like 20 to 25 guys are first-round picks. Most guys are not only first-round picks, but they're like top half of the draft first-round picks, which the Bills are not ever getting to. So if you want to go down that road of saying we're going to avoid paying 4 offensive linemen in the same year by replacing Deion Dawkins, you can't do that in round 3. You're going to have to do it in round 1. And in terms of this draft, this is not a great tackle draft. In fact, it's probably tackle is probably on one of the lower ends in terms of position qualities. But you can find guys at the bottom of round 1 that would make some sense. It's not the best play, but it is out there. So regardless, though, no matter where you want to end up, There's upside, downside, all these choices. And again, if you take a tackle this year, we talked about the guard, the third round guard fits in nicely on this roster. He becomes depth. You've got options for him. One of the things I didn't mention is that not only is he backing up Osiris Torrance, he can back up Alec Anderson, but he's essentially the backup to the center because if Connor McGovern gets hurt, then Alec Anderson can move over to play center. And now you drop the guy you drafted at the third round into the guard spot. If you draft a tackle, all he's going to back up is tackle. And you hope that he can play right and left. You would need to find a guy that really can handle both sides, because if you're going to spend a first round pick on a tackle that you want to only be a backup this season, he better be able to back up both spots. So while the tackle idea probably makes sense longer term in terms of which guy you want to pay, you'd rather hold on to the younger player at guard in Torrance than the older player at tackle in Dion. Finding a guy who works, fitting him into the roster this year are much more difficult decisions. You can do it a whole lot easier at guard later in the draft. But these are the questions that Brandon Beane should be thinking about in this draft. This is not a round 5, 6, and 7 solution. Because one way or another, he's going to have to decide, do I have 4 highly paid offensive linemen, or do I replace Osiris Torrance, or do I replace Dion Dawkins? Those are the choices he's looking at. And history says choice A doesn't work for a Super Bowl team. Choice B with Dion Dawkins is very tough to execute, separate of the whole idea that some people in the town would revolt if you wanted to make it clear that you're moving on from Dion Dawkins soon, which is another thing that would happen if you draft a tackle. Or you have to replace the guard. And that wouldn't be a problem for 2026. But next year, you have an offensive line now that would have 2 guards that, at least sitting here right this second, you don't know can play in the NFL. And I think when you look at the 3 choices, I think replacing the guard makes sense. But again, if that's something you want to do, you got to do it this year. And you got to do it probably before round 5, at least, probably before round 4. And as much as we've talked about the draft, to go right back to where we started this whole conversation, my thought on the draft has been edge and then receiver. The Bills might end up having to go defensive tackle and guard with their first 2 picks, or at least that might make the most sense. And while the long-term build would be helped, augmented by those 2 picks, 2026 wouldn't look all that much better. And I've talked a few times, and I mentioned it even in the last half hour here, with a first-year head coach not going all in or not even making 2026 the focus, I think makes a lot of sense. Using this draft as kind of a building block to make 2027, 28, and 29 your big-time window, I think is the right play. And when you start to consider all these little things in between, what the draft lays out for you in round 1, what kind of options are there, and addressing the issue at offensive line, which is going to be a problem sooner, or maybe not a problem, but something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. Going non-impact positions or lesser impact positions with the first 2 picks, I think makes a lot more sense. All right, let's take a break here. Coming up next, like I said, I want to get into addressing the Sabres. This is still kind of Kevin Adams' team, everybody. But he got fired and then they got good. So who gets the credit for that? We'll address that issue after a break. My name is Thad Brown. This is the Endgame. You're watching Rochester First. The kids who all were very popular in school, more popular than you, they all call it Rock 1. Because Rock 1 is cooler. We should call it Rock 1. I call it Rock 1. You should call it Rock 1 too. Rock 1 is back right after this. Pat Brown back here with you on the Endgame. Sam Burns, right now your round one leader at the Masters. Round one still going on. Rory McIlroy, 5 under through 17, playing the 18th hole right now. My Rory McIlroy first round leader bet. Very interested in what happens to Rory on 18. I'm going to leave this up. And in the middle of me talking about something else, you're going to hear me be excited or very upset based on what happens to Mr. McIlroy on the 18th hole. Before we get to that, though, that vital piece of information that I know you're all dying to find out the end of, I want to address the Sabres for a minute here. Buffalo got a win over the Rangers last night. Right now, they're in first place by themselves in the division. Now they have a game up on, or the Tampa and Montreal have a game in hand on the Sabres, and they play each other tonight. So somebody's winning. Buffalo's going to play in Columbus. If Buffalo doesn't get any points, they'll go back into a tie. But regardless, this has been a wildly successful season for the Sabres. And the catalyst for it, seemingly, was the firing of old GM Kevin Adams. Now, it wasn't like anything significantly changed with the roster when Adams was dismissed in December, but it was right about the same time that the Sabres started to go on that ridiculous 4-month run. That's really over now. They're more of just a regular good team as opposed to a historic good team. But the coincidence or the timing, I think, has got to be considered more than a coincidence. And how this team is good has been a discussion point, I think, for the last 2.5 months. There are a lot of logical reasons why the Sabres have suddenly turned things around. You could argue that they've had a lot of good players that suddenly just figured it out. That Lindy Ruff is a really good coach, but you can't just expect him to walk in and have everything click within 365 days. It takes more than a year. Those are both very reasonable, salt of the earth type explanations about why the Sabres are where they are. But another one that certainly has some credence, and I get the impression that around the Sabres, there are people who believe this, but moving on from Kevin Adams. And with a turnaround this big, with a result so surprising as this Sabres season has been, you can't sit here and say, oh, it was one thing. That has to be the result of multiple factors. It probably is because a number of young guys kind of had the light bulb go on at the same time. And maybe that can be viral to a degree in terms of not necessarily that like randomly, the center gets it, therefore the wing gets it. But because one or two players start to understand what to do, it makes it easier for the player next to them to understand that there's a better safety net. When Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck become guys you can depend on, it's a better situation for someone like Jack Quinn or Zach Metza when he's up to develop. And I'm just throwing out names there. I'm not necessarily saying that's connected. The point is when you have the more players start to succeed, the easier it is for their teammates to succeed around them. And it became a kind of thing where once a couple of the green lights went on, it was easier for another one after another one after another one. And the Lindy Ruff coaching experience, what he's been teaching, saying, pounding into these guys, finally clicking a year and a half in, is a very reasonable explanation. But as much, and those feel like on ice things, right? X and O type things. I'm in a better position. I'm learning how to work the puck better. I know what passes to make. All that stuff is hockey whiteboard stuff. And that, I think, very much has to be a part of why this team is where they're at right now. But you cannot dismiss what's likely the human side of it, which is Kevin Adams, as one of the leaders of this franchise, had lost the confidence of the fan base and clearly had lost the confidence of the organization. And by removing that figurehead, that authority figure from the equation, classic addition by subtraction, people didn't believe in what he was selling. Not only in terms of moves he made, even though those moves have turned out to create a team that's one of the best in the league. When he was dismissed, there was not a belief that Kevin Adams was a guy who could make things go right for the Sabres. And whether that was right or wrong, whether you want to argue about it being right or wrong now, at the time, the feeling, the human beings in that organization had so little belief in Kevin Adams, moving on from him had to be a breath of fresh air. The whole fresh start, clean slate kind of thing, that stuff matters to people. And as much as you might want to look at a sports team and think of them as names on a fantasy team or X's and O's on a chalkboard, it's still a group of people working together. And when you make things better for the people, that isn't necessarily something that shows up on the whiteboard. It still can have a significant effect. And I think the people part of the Sabres, the human part of the Sabres, benefited significantly from Kevin Adams being dismissed. And now we end up with this team that's a couple of wins away from being not only a division winner, but potentially still a 1 seed in the conference. Jarmo Kekalainen hasn't really had much impact on this team. He's added 2 players that of substance, Logan Stanley and Sam Carrick. Luke Shen and Pearson haven't really played a whole lot. So his impact on this team is more just a depth defenseman and a nice fourth-line center who's been probably even surprisingly productive for what was expected. But just having someone at the top that didn't have the stench of Kevin Adams can have a positive effect. And I think absolutely has to be included in terms of the things that have made the Sabres turn things around. But at the same time, I don't think you dismiss what Kevin Adams did, because this is still 90% of his roster. It's his moves. It's his draft picks. It's his trades. So although Kevin Adams had to go, and I had zero issue at the time with the firing, same as everybody else. And as much as the Kevin Adams firing, I think 100% made things better with the Sabres. And again, probably more so with the people as opposed to on the whiteboard. Kevin Adams still deserves a pretty healthy share of the pie when you're dialing up the credit for what this Sabres team has been. And it's weird to think that a guy who is certainly on the Mount Rushmore, maybe not certainly, but I would make the argument for, I think Kevin Adams is probably on the Mount Rushmore of people who created this Sabres team that is now on the brink of potentially being a division winner. It doesn't happen without him being fired, because you needed that last piece. You needed, maybe not the last piece, you needed that other piece of the people in the building believing in the direction of the team and believing in the leadership of the team. And that was clearly not happening with Kevin Adams at the helm. So like I said, you don't get a turnaround like what the Sabres have accomplished, going from a 14-year drought like this to one of the best teams in the NHL without having a variety of factors involved. And yes, young players developing, Lindy Ruff coaching, I think those things are close to the top of the list. As is the way Kevin Adams built this team, but also as is dismissing Kevin Adams to create the kind of atmosphere and belief that can make this turnaround possible. And by the way, if you want to have a say on this, I have a poll going right now on X in terms of would the Sabres have still made the playoffs if Kevin Adams had not been fired? And I think the place I would land on is I think they would have made it, because I think the other factors involved, the Lindy factor, the player factor, I think there would have been enough there for Buffalo to end up in the playoffs. Now, the East is so good this year. There's also a very real scenario that if Kevin Adams was still here, they would have been a lot better, but would have missed out because it's just so tough to make the playoffs in that conference this year. But I think the Sabres still make the playoffs if Kevin Adams is still the GM, but I don't think they are the same team they are right now to where people in Western New York have reasonable dreams of this team becoming a Stanley Cup winner. Still waiting on the Roy McIlroy result in 18. I hope this doesn't mean that he's like fighting through the trees somewhere. Most of you at home, if you're listening to this right now, you probably already know what happens. So if he makes like double or something, you're kind of laughing to yourself waiting for me to see the bad news on Rory here. One thing about the Masters that people talk about, and it's not necessarily the Masters by itself, but as a part of this time of the season, is that people call this the best time of the year. You've got the NCAA tournament that just ended on Monday. Congrats to Michigan, hail to the victors. Definitely was the best team in the country all season long, or at least all tournament long. You've also got the start of the baseball season. We're about a week and a half into that. Yankees are good, Mets are good. People in this part of the area, part of the world, pretty happy with that. And then you've got the Masters, which not only kind of heralds the real beginning of the golf season. You know, it's the first major of the year for non-golf fans. This is one of the 4 tournaments, the only ones that matter. So we're doing that this week. And the thing that I think about when we discuss this as the best time of the year for sports is that it's easy for us to watch. Sorry about that. This is not a high-stress part of the year. This is not, I'm worried about what my team does. Bills fans, when you get to the playoffs, those games are hard, right? Those games are stressful. Because, yes, you might see an incredible victory, but if the Bills lose again in the playoffs, it becomes hard to deal with. Same thing for baseball fans in October. You know, as a Brewers fan last year, watching those Dodgers games when LA whipped right through them was hard. That was not super fun, even if I was happy to see my team playing in the NLCS. That's a really cool experience. And if you're an NBA fan or a hockey fan, as Sabres fans are about to find out, you know, late April, May, June, these are going to be stressful games to a degree. You get to game 6, game 7, Buffalo down 3-2. That's a stressful game. But this time of year, these few weeks that people call the best time of year, there's no stress here. Yeah, maybe you might stress about your bracket, but even to get to a really stressful spot, you've got, Roy made par. All right, so Rory's in at 5 under. If nobody gets to 6 under, I'm hitting a bet today. Be a nice little bet too. Round 1 winner was good odds. I got to worry about Scotty Scheffler. He's 3 under through 7. But okay, 5 under. Rory McIlroy is in with par. Sam Burns 5 under also. So co-leaders right now at the Masters. Nobody else is even 4 under at the moment. Justin Rose, by the way, 3 under through 8. So the guys who were in the playoff last year, Rory McIlroy and Justin Rose, could be right back to the top of the leaderboard, round number 1. Anyway, back to what I was talking about this time of year, though. You're not worried about your bracket for most of it. You only worry about the bracket if you have a team. Like if you have a chance to win your bracket in the Final Four, then you might stress out about it a little bit. For the most part, though, the bracket is just fun. There's games everywhere. There's upsets. There's buzzer beaters. There's High Point knocking off Wisconsin, stuff like that. It's all fun. Baseball season. Yeah, you might be a hardcore Yankee fan or a Met fan or a Red Sox fan or whatever, a Dodger fan. But this is like game 12. You know, this is the first week of the season. Yeah, certainly it's a problem if you lose a bunch of games here. You know, the old adage is you can't win a pennant in April, but you can lose one. So there's some stress. But it's early in the season. It's hard to be really bad through the first week and a half to where you get stressed out about it. And then the Masters, unless you're like me with a few units on players here or there, this is just fun. Watching the best golfers in the world attack the most picturesque course that pretty much has ever been invented. Of course, we all know, at least the people who watch this event year after year, you know what 15 looks like. You know that 10, 11, 12 is Amen Corner. You know about the par 5 on number 8 that everybody can reach. It's uphill. You know what the course looks like. And it's just fun to go back and to see it. And it's also about a beginning. For those of us in the Northeast, golf season for us is right around the corner. Spring and summer are on the way. We're about to be let out of our houses after hibernation through the winter. So why is this the best time of year? Because it's the easiest time of year to watch sports. This is the low stress time of year. This is the fun part. You don't walk into a game. Yeah, it's fun to see the Bills win a playoff game. It's fun to see the Dodgers win a World Series. But I can guarantee you, man, Dodgers fans went through every stage of emotion watching that 7-game series last year. These few weeks are not that. These few weeks are the easy part of the sports schedule, which is why, partially, why people call it the best time of the year. And it may not be. I think October is an argument for that when you've got college football going, hockey starting, basketball starting, NFL and college football in full swing. That's a fun time of year too. And a relatively less stressful time of year, even though for some NFL fans, every single game is a big deal, and I get that. But these few weeks, late March and April, man, this is just fun. This is sports being made to be enjoyed, not to be worried about. Unless, like me, you have Rory McIlroy as the leader after round 1. That's about the only reason why. So that's why it makes it fun for this part of the year. I do got a quick Masters story that I read, and I want to lay this out because this was awesome. So there apparently had always been a story at the Masters about a media member who made a 2 on the par 5 15th, what they call an albatross. And there have only been 3 scores of 2, 3 albatrosses on 15 in the history of Augusta National. And one of them was apparently made in the 90s by some media member playing on Monday after the tournament. For those who don't know, many in the media, not all the media, but they have like a lottery essentially to decide who gets to play in the course on Monday. But after the tournament is over on Monday, some media members get to play the course. And the rumor goes that not only did a media member play, but he made a 2 on the 15th hole. The kicker to the story was the media member was not supposed to be there. They had kind of snuck their way into the event somehow and no one knew why. Or that at least was how the story went. But I think it was Tony Beal, and I'm pretty sure I posted this on my X feed. I'll check it here as I'm talking about it. He actually went out and investigated what really happened with this. Let me scroll down. Got to go through all my texts and stuff, all my tweets. Oh yeah, here it is. Joe Beal. Yes. So I did post this on my X feed from April 6th. Joe Beal, who's got another good story this week about something else with the Masters. I don't know. Go to his feed. It's Joel M. Beal, Beall. Great stuff there. But what he did is he investigated the story of the media member who snuck onto the course and made a 2 and found out that it was true, but not the way you'd think. So what it was is actually the combination of 2 different stories. There was a 2 made in a Monday tournament after the Masters, but it was by a former club pro who, got into the event, got a chance to play, but was supposed to be there. There was nothing wrong with the person being there. And the club pro, they found the guy, and I think the person who actually made the 2 had passed away, but a guy who played with him is who Joel Beal talked to and just explained it was getting late, it was getting dark. He had a shot from about 200 yards out, curved one kind of right to left around the trees, and it went in the hole. One of 3 albatrosses ever on that hole at Augusta. And what a cool thing to be able to say that there have been 3 2s ever on this hole at Augusta National, and you have one of them. An awesome shot. But there was nothing illegal or improper about it. What also happened, and I don't remember if it was the same year, but it was close to the same year. There was a media member who got to play in the tournament, and it wasn't totally legal. What happened was I think it was a writer who got to play. It was his editor who won the chance to be in the tournament, and the editor kind of handed his pass to the writer because he thought the writer would value it more. So the writer got to play. Now, is that the worst offense in the world? No. But do you mess around with Augusta National or something like that? You generally do not. And as evidence in this story, the writer who played in the tournament, who still is alive, because again, this all happened in the early 90s, did not want his name published or the outlet he worked for published in recounting the story. He did admit, though, that he played when his editor, who actually was the person who was supposed to be there, kind of gave him his pass. So the person who played, the writer who played, had to impersonate the person who actually won to get onto the course. But he didn't make any great shots or any albatrosses. It was just something that happened over the years, that there was a story about the writer who got on, didn't sneak on, just kind of took someone else's spot, which happened around the same time as this albatross happened, and the stories kind of melded together. So Joe Beal, great job, cool story. Highly recommend you check him out. Again, you can go to my X feed, Thad Brown 7, to find that story. And then if you go to his feed, there's other good stuff from the Masters this week. All right, that's going to do it for me today. We'll be back again on Monday. Talk about who wins this event. My next big wager would actually be Sam Burns cashing this thing out, man. If Sam Burns wins, you're going to get a very happy host on Monday. But I'm already happy with Rory McIlroy being in the house at 505. So we'll talk again on Monday. More on the draft, more with the Bills coming up. I mean, we're getting hot and heavy with this thing, less than 2 weeks away from round number 1. And again, please check out BKL Nightly tonight. Me and Carl Jones going through all of our draft hot takes as we head into the 2026 NFL Draft. Thanks for watching today. My name is Thad Brown. This is Rock One. I've already explained why you should call it that. We'll see you again on Monday. The news is up right after this.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.